start with the latest out of Israel and Gaza, where it's now just past 9:30 p.m. local time. Israel's defence minister has told troops they will soon see Gaza from the inside, suggesting a ground offensive is getting closer. He said the command will come as tens of thousands of troops mass along the border. In fact, it's a lot more than that. It's more than 300,000 troops. The Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza remains closed after US President Joe Biden reached an agreement with Egypt to allow limited aid through. The delivery of aid could begin tomorrow, as the World Health Organization says the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is spiralling out of control. Some more main developments now. The British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has met Israel's Prime Minister in a show of solidarity, saying, "We want you to win." More than 3,700 people have now been killed in Gaza. That's according to the Palestinian Health Ministry, while 1,400 people have been killed in Israel.
Death toll now tops over 4,000 in Gaza, over 17,000 approximately injured, and 1.1 million people displaced. The war rages on as over 400,000 reservist troops prepare to enter Gaza City for the expulsion of Hamas and rescue the hostages, and also to expulse 1.1 million people from their homes permanently. Let's read the latest news today. Al Jazeera: thousands of people in Muslim-majority countries and beyond held demonstrations in solidarity with Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, calling for an end to Israel's total blockade and airstrikes. Gaza death toll tops 4,000. Residents endure yet another night of relentless bombing amid uncertainty over entry of aid from Egypt. Several people killed in Israeli air attack on the Greek Orthodox St. Porphyry's Church and compound, officials in Gaza say. Israel's defense minister tells troops they will soon see Gaza from inside. At least 4,137 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes on Gaza since Hamas's October 7th attack inside Israel, which killed more than 1,400 people. David Petraeus, retired U.S. general and a former director of the CIA, had told Al Jazeera that Israel's impending ground offensive will be challenging. Urban combat is always challenging, but when you add the presence of over 200 hostages, you add in an enemy that is willing to kill himself to take Israelis with them. This will be a very challenging mission, he said. If you truly go in to destroy Hamas, and I'm not saying that they will, but if you do that, you have to clear every building, every floor, every room, every cellar, and every tunnel. And the tunnel complex underneath Gaza is very extensive. We're looking at $106 billion that President Biden is asking Congress for. The vast bulk of it, some $61 billion, is allocated to Ukraine. Plenty of money for war, but no money when it comes to domestic issues, such as a rising homeless population, incremental rise in inflation. I live in New York, not in the city, but Lower Westchester. The average rents in New York City for a one-bedroom are $2,100. Obscene. It's not counting food, electricity, heat, your phone, necessities, right? Absurd. This city is backwards. We're supposed to be the beacon of the future, advanced city, most popular city in the country, but yet backwards thinking. Look at our governor, Kathy Hochul. First thing she does, goes right to the wall in Israel. Takes a photo op because that's what she's about. Declares unwavering loyalty to Israel. Now, that's a smart political move, because if you don't last in politics. It's not a conspiracy theory. That's not anti-Semitism. That's actually true. We have an active committee called the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, also known as AIPAC, which monitors Every single congressperson, every governor in this country, mandatory to attend our conference. Imagine a foreign government telling another foreign government that it's mandatory for you to attend our conference. That only talks about Israeli issues, not American issues. So we have a lot of problems here at home, not to mention an awash in violence. The simpletons will basically say this is a gun issue. Wish it was as simple as that. It's a psychological issue. We're a damaged nation, inherently. We're polarized by ideology. We're psychologically damaged because our government is a representative of the people. If the government is for the people, by the people, well, then we're insane as a people. Because we vote in these people that don't care about us and spend billions of dollars for death and destruction abroad, whether it's manufactured by the CIA, the intelligence services, or pushed, influenced by American foreign policy. But then you have $14 billion that Biden wants to allocate to Israel. Approximately $10 billion of this would be to direct military aid. We give them aid anyway. Here's another additional $10 billion. Then he's tacked on $14 billion for implementing new immigration measures, along with $10 billion for humanitarian relief. It's a big risk of Congress. Obviously, it's going to be discussing that in the hours and days ahead. U.S. vetoes UN Security Council action on Gaza and Israel. The United Nations vetoed a UN Security Council resolution on Wednesday that would have called for humanitarian pauses in the conflict between Israel and Palestinian Hamas militants to allow humanitarian aid across to the Gaza Strip. The vote on the Brazilian drafted text was twice delayed in the last couple of days as the United States tried to broker aid access to Gaza. 12 members voted in favor of the draft text on Wednesday, while Russia and Britain abstained. The United States was the only vote to say no. And of course, the United States knows nothing about peace, knows nothing about hegemony. I believe in the 200 years of its existence, the United States only had 10 years within that 200 of no war. An absurd short amount of time. We've been involved in conflicts in 2 centuries all around the world. Either we helped to facilitate them or we were directly involved in them. We were on the ground doing the hard work of diplomacy, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield told the 15-member council after the vote, we believe we need to let the diplomacy play out. You have no problem spending money for war, but you do have a problem when it comes to having a peace resolution. Not surprised. Now, what does this mean for the United States government in general? Because not everybody's a sociopath, right? Well, there was a breaking report by the Huffington Post. Exclusive. Mutiny brewing inside State Department over Israeli-Palestine policy. Of course, because not everybody is bought and sold by Israel. People tend to forget that the Bush administrations, senior and junior, were basically almost anti-Israeli. Now you have Catholics and you have Zionists that don't see eye to eye. And there's a huge influx of Baptist Catholics involved in the State Department and Pentagon. I mean, where do you think they get the future bloodline from? Well, they get it from the late Jerry Falwell's University. Which basically caters to the preservation of the future of the United States in a Catholic sense. Liberty University. a lot of the staffers, temps who basically work in the White House, work in the Pentagon. Later on, they become people that are quite invested or quite, or rather influential in both areas of the branches of government. President Joe Biden approach to the ongoing violence in Israel and Palestine is fueling mounting tensions at the U.S. government agency most involved in foreign policy, State Department. Officials told Huffington Post that Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his most senior advisors are overlooking widespread internal frustration because we're so apt to have a foreign government so involved in American foreign policy. It's almost like the Pentagon, which is very ego-driven, wants to always be at the front and center, ahead of the intelligence services, especially when it comes to war. We saw this after 9/11. There was a big discussion between the CIA and the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, about who will lead the attack in Afghanistan. In Iraq, it was the Pentagon. In Afghanistan, was the CIA. Some department staff said they feel Blinken and the team are uninterested in their own experts' advice as they focus on supporting Israel's expanding operation in Gaza, where the Palestinian militant group Hamas is based. That's basic. There's basically mutiny brewing with the state at all levels, of one State Department official said. Biden and Blinken say they want to help Israel decisively defeat Hamas, but that they do not want to see suffering among ordinary Gazans on a broader regional conflict, because the officials at the Pentagon State War Department are basically, they're looking at it in a broader context. Biden can't, he's senile, right? So you have people like foreign policy analysts under Biden, and then you have war analysts at the Pentagon. War analysts at the Pentagon say that if we continue supporting Israel, what's going to happen is that we're going to enter a multi-throng attack by the Shiites, Iran, Hezbollah, and Syria, right? And maybe even the Sunni majority around the world, because they sympathize with Palestine. There could be some sporadic terrorist attacks inside the United States, maybe at U.S. interests abroad. They're looking at it that way. Now, the State Department is saying, well, we're getting pressured by Israeli Public Affairs Committee to basically act as a buffer zone, or even worse, as a big brother of sorts, to back them up in a wider regional war, which is what Israel wanted all this time. They want a war with Iran. They want a war with Lebanon, get rid of Hezbollah and the Hezbollah and Shiite and Al-Quds military force, and get rid of them. And that will basically put Israel and Saudi Arabia as the only true powers in the Middle East, right? But there's also people within the State Department that don't want this because the ramifications are enormous. This will destroy the Democrats forever. The Republicans will run on the anti-war campaign, even though a lot of them are showing their support for Israel, major conservatives anyway. But there's a huge nexus within especially the Trump administration, that are basically saying, we can't afford this war. DeSantis is AIPAC sold, so he's supporting of Israel. So there is a large contingent of congressional officials that are at odds with Biden, because Biden is basically backing Israel here. But because he's 100,000 years old, his rational facilities upstairs are not working in conjunction with seeing 30, 40 years down the line, or even 10 years down the line. Hell, even tomorrow, right? So he's not working on that, looking at this in a much longer or long-range goal. But the other State Department officials are, and they're saying, this is a disaster for us and disaster for the Democrats. Two officials told Huffington Post that diplomats are preparing what's called a descent cable a document criticizing American policy that goes to the agency's leaders through a protected internal channel. When you link on this, it takes you to Just Security's website, where you basically see Congress can investigate Afghanistan withdrawal without compelling a vital dissent channel. But it basically talks about the cable showing that there's a dissent growing. In fact, one official, I forgot his name, basically resigned. Such cables are seen with the State Department as consequential statements of serious disagreement at key historical moments. I'll link this article so you can see that for yourself. All right, there he is, Josh Paul. The cable will come in the wake of Josh Paul, a veteran State Department official, announcing his resignation on Wednesday. After more than a decade of working on arms deals, he said, he could not morally support the U.S. moves to supply Israel's war effort. He's seeing it from the long run, that this is career suicide. In the last 24 hours, I'm beginning an immense amount of outreach from colleagues with really encouraging words of support, and a lot of people saying that they feel the same way. It's very difficult for them. Why? Because those Israelis are slaughtering Gaza's wholesale. And this is basically causing a ruckus, why you're seeing so many protests happening worldwide, okay? And at the same time, this is actually hurting the United States, because the United States basically, okay, they're not saying anything, not seeing anything, not hearing anything, they're not reacting. And this is bad for us. We did this in the Balkans in 1993-94. We did this in the Yugoslav war, when Slobodan Milosevic had egregious war crimes against the Muslim population, some of the worst in history, world history. Iraq, 90, 2003, 20-year Afghanistan war, and of course the drone strikes under the Obama administration of Libya, Syria, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq. Right? And Yemen. All right, there has been a systematic destruction of the Muslim population that is backed by Israel and ignored by Saudi Arabia and the Gulf and the United States. The United States is the instigator here when it comes to enticing war with Muslim nations. And this all has ramifications, because the IDF had threatened Hezbollah, U.S. in talks with Israel for Gaza state zones, because what the Israeli government wants, not the people, but what the government wants, this war cabinet between Gantz and Netanyahu, they want to get rid of their enemies wholesale, and they need the United States to do this. And the United States is like, this is the reason why Josh Paul quit, because he sees the writing on the wall. This is no good. It's only going to come back to hurt us. Forever in the Middle East, forever with the Shiite and Sunni community, forever in the world's eyes, because the world is seeing us remaining silent while the slaughter of Palestinians are happening. And this is a slaughter. It's no longer about revenge for what happened with Hamas. This is a wholesale. We're bombing Christian churches now. Not the first time. If you watch my previous video, I do talk about the report by Amnesty International in the 2009 Gaza war, Operation Cast Lead, where Amnesty International reported that Israeli military were targeting hospitals and churches. There is settler violence right now in the West Bank. It's outside of the Gaza Strip now. This is now outside. Dozens and dozens are killed in the West Bank by Israeli settlers. Ask them what they think about Christians. Right? Ask them what they think about Christians. All right? Now, Israel is planning to establish massive demilitarized zone along the length of Gaza border fence. What this is ultimately about is a multiple of avenues here. The permanent elimination of Hamas. I'm for that. The complete expulsion of the Palestinians in Gaza. It's a land grab. And of course, the regional broader war of getting rid of Israeli preconceived enemies, which is Iran, Lebanon, and Syria. But they need the United States for this. Now, in this sense, they need the United States to remain silent and just support Israel. Israel is planning to establish a broad demilitarized zone surrounding the Gaza Strip after completing its impending ground assault in the Palestinian territory and eradicating Hamas, according to reports. The expected demilitarized zone would extend the length of the 40-mile fence already encircling the Gaza Strip. What they want to do is get rid of all the Gazans out of Gaza City, the most densely populated area in the Gaza Strip. And they want to get rid of it. Nobody lives there. It's not under Israeli rule. Israeli military. There won't be any Israeli military inside it, but nobody will live in it. Remember, they told 1.1 million people to leave. This is a way to control the entire city. Now, what happens? Now, this is speculation, of course, but what happens? Now you have large contingents of Palestinians living in smaller enclaves. Think of it like this. Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or maybe some remnants of Hamas, are in these enclaves. This will give Israel allowance, justification, their own justification, to bomb these small enclaves, which will cause larger deaths. Remember, now without Gaza City, you have smaller, densely populated areas of Gaza holding more Palestinians. That means more deaths from above. Instead of killing 10, we could kill 50. If you don't think the government thinks this way, you look at my previous videos, and I showed you what the Netanyahu government, his cabinet members, think of Palestinians. If you think Netanyahu is bad, they're worse. And that's what's coming. For those who think, oh, they're not murderers, they're not talking bad about Palestine, they talk about Hamas, they talk about the killing of thousands of Palestinians. They're racists. This is coming from their, the opposition leaders. They're even saying these people are madmen. It's the most racist, nationalist government ever in Israeli history. There's settler leaders on Netanyahu's cabinet, and they hate Christians. So for you conservatives out there, that's what they think of you. That's the reason why tens of thousands, and when I say it's like over 100,000 people that protested against Netanyahu's government, those Israelis know we got to get rid of these people because they'll basically hurt back all of us, just like Hamas, right? Because you love to say the Palestinians, they voted for Hamas, right? Meanwhile, Israelis voted for Netanyahu. What does that mean? What's the difference between Netanyahu's cabinet and Hamas? Nothing. If you look at Israeli settlers, what's the difference between their ideology, their religion, and the Islamic State? Nothing. They both believe that their religious structure should be prominent around the world. They also believe in a caliphate of sorts, where the Israelis think that getting rid of all the Palestinians, having all the Israelis back in Israel, and building the third temple, and having, 500 Gentiles as slaves in heaven. They believe in a caliphate of sorts. They share so much in common. That's why there's no difference between evangelical Christians and Jewish Zionists and Wahhabi Muslims. You all share that ultra-nationalist, ultra-Orthodox mentality. Fanaticism, fascism, Islamism, Zionism, evangelicalism, right? The isms, the ideology, twist your mentality, twist your humanity into thinking other people are unworthy, ungodly. And if by ungodly, meaning you're no longer a good person. Hell, we could kill you. That's what God would have wanted. Isn't that what God did to the Amalekites, the Hittites in the Old Testament? Talk to any religious Jew that's not a fanatic. Talk to any settler who are fanatics. These are the JTF people, Jewish Task Force, right? The Kahanists who believe that Israel is a Jewish state and no Palestinians should live there. In fact, kill them. This is according to the ideology under the late Rabbi Meir Kahane, who incidentally was killed in the first ever Arab fundamentalist terrorist attack in the United States by El Sayed Nosair in 1990 in New York. So what does it go on to say here? The border fence that has an electronic border fence that has sensors on it, that has cameras on it, the wall behind it, by the way, which only leads to believe, how the hell did they miss Hamas coming in, the border fence? Right? We're going to find out years later. Watch. You watch. You mark my words. They knew this was coming. They knew. And yeah, Israelis died, but so did people on 9/11. 3,000 people died on 9/11. And the CIA and Saudi intelligence, they knew there was Al-Qaeda inside the United States, even though that the intelligence in the year prior, in the years 1999, 2000, hey, Al-Qaeda wants to attack the United States. Meanwhile, they knew Al-Qaeda was inside the United States, and they never told the FBI about it. That led to 9/11. Who knows with Israel? Hey, let's let Hamas come in here. Yeah, they might kill some people, but for the greater good, which is getting rid of the Palestinians in Gaza and to take control of Israel and slowly push out the Palestinians out of Israel altogether. You think that's a conspiracy? You look at Netanyahu's wartime cabinet right now. You look at his cabinet, and you'll notice they have similar thoughts. They even say it outright. A zone along the whole 67 kilometers on the border fence, we were told a zone that no one will be allowed to go into. No one will be allowed to go into. An expanded demilitarized zone would provide Israel Defense Forces with a deeper and wider range of fire across the border territory and be instrumental in repelling any future incursions from Hamas terrorists. You wouldn't have Hamas terrorists. You wouldn't have Palestinian Islamic Jihad if you didn't have a military border surrounding Palestinians, if you didn't have a racist government led by Netanyahu, if you didn't allow Palestinians to leave Gaza or leave the West Bank, if you lived in harmony, if you didn't have racial checkpoints, racially segregated checkpoints, if you didn't raise homes, if you didn't steal land, if you didn't burn crops and destroy the infrastructure, destroy the geological centers in Gaza, if you didn't make Gaza a wasteland, you wouldn't have these groups. Didn't have them in the 1800s. You didn't have them when Israelis and Arabs lived together. Who founded the Israeli state? 1948, Stern and Irgun. What are they? Terrorists. Are they Arabs? No, they were Israeli. Who firebombed the King David Hotel to get the British out of Israel? The Israelis. The Nakba, the slaughter of Palestinians by the hundreds of thousands. Who did that? Arabs? No, Israelis. Blowback is real. It doesn't condone what they did, Hamas. But now you have to understand why they did it. Just like the United States. Why did Al-Qaeda attack us on 9/11? That was a question for the FBI in a Senate hearing, where the FBI basically said it basically surrounds our foreign policy with Israel. Wow. Really? Maybe the question is, well, what's wrong with our foreign policy? And what's wrong with the foreign policy of Israel? Oh, no, don't pay attention there. They hate us because of our freedoms, because women vote. When you look at the declarations of Al-Qaeda, has nothing to do with religion. You read the Hamas charter, it talks about the expulsion and destruction of Israel. Okay? But yet, it was the Israeli government who facilitated the rise and the growth of Hamas when they first started as al-Muslim al-Jamliya by Sheikh Rahman Yassin. And Israel said, oh, this group is a charity. They work at universities and schools, let them. Meanwhile, the Israeli military are helping them to facilitate their growth in the hopes of getting rid of a bigger enemy, which is the Palestinian Liberation Organization, because they were getting sympathetic to the European International Theater regarding a two-state solution, something Israel doesn't want. Now, it seems that after the weekend, or maybe on the weekend, I don't know the time or the date, nobody knows except the Israeli government, when the incursion into Gaza City happens. And I happen to think that this will happen probably after the weekend, probably by next week. I predicted by early next week. It might happen at night because this will be a surprise incursion. I think we have intelligence on the ground in Israel regarding the CIA, or maybe a branch of the CIA called the Special Activities Division, because this involves American hostages as well. Wouldn't be surprised if the United States is involved or French intelligence are involved in trying to locate where the hostages might be. Don't be surprised if Hamas spies are working with Israel, the United States. Basically, some Hamas operatives are basically our spies for Israel, or Palestinians who may not have, water or goods, basically acting as spies against Hamas, which is even, much more deadly for them, and working with them in the hopes of getting a better area in south of the country, a free pass out of Gaza City if they're stuck in Gaza City. They're giving us intelligence, let them go. I think that's what's going to happen here. And with that intelligence, they'll make a decision. And don't be surprised. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but don't be surprised if a lot of these hostages are saved, but some of them are going to get killed. And they're going to get killed and blamed on Hamas. Meanwhile, they're going to get killed in the crossfire. But at least we killed off Hamas. Hamas will not exist after this. This is the end of Hamas. The only Hamas leaders that are going to live are the ones in Qatar. That's who's been funding them. Because they don't live in the Gaza City. The foot soldiers, they're all going to be killed. I believe this is going to happen. And the ultimate goal is going to have no Palestinians in Gaza City ever again. Because this is about the expulsion of the Palestinians. And in my previous video, I talked about the war crimes that are taking place. It's now, there's no defense of this, and there are still people defending it. It's just makes them look really reprehensible. All right, that's the end of this video. As always, I will report unbiased, without prejudice, and give you the updates about what is happening. And I'll see you in the next video. All right? Take care, everybody.
فوتونا